Sometimes you see a string of headlines that feel a little off. Like if you take them at face value, they're just another round of leaders shaking hands and smiling for the cameras. But when I scroll through these, I got that weird little shiver. Something's moving beneath the surface here. Canada and the European Union, not exactly a pair that grabs the world's attention most days, although perhaps recently that's not true. And yet when you dig into what is actually happening on energy, defense, even space, you start to see a subtle redrawing of alliances. You start to see continents hedging, finding new lifeboats, preparing for the next storm, especially as the US throws curveballs and global stability feels more fragile than ever. When I saw the announcement about Canada pouring money into the European Space Agency and the new strategic declarations coming out of Niagara, honestly, it didn't seem real to me at first. It's the kind of move that you would expect if we were on the brink of something much bigger and probably scarier. So what is actually driving all of this? How did Canada and the EU, two actors that rarely take center stage together, suddenly become each other's true friends and reliable allies, as one diplomat put it? Is this about trade or is it about survival? Let's just look at what came up first. We're going to go over a string of headlines and we're going to make a story out of all of this, piecing it all together. Okay, first up, the official language is interesting in this one. Advancing the Canada-EU relationship and reviewing progress since their big summit. You don't really see headlines like this by accident, my friends. Let's just have a read very quickly. Cooperation has deepened across the full spectrum of our partnership: international peace, security and defense, economic resilience, digital innovation, green transition, and people-to-people ties. What is not said? This is the language of hedging bets. When the world gets shaky, countries that used to keep each other at arm's length start locking arms. There's always more beneath the official words, right? Stability, resilience, and prosperity across the Atlantic at a time when our shared values are under pressure. I wonder what the pressure is. And you know what's wild? If you scroll through the comments or catch the undercurrent in some policy circles, there's a half-serious, half-dreamy question that keeps popping up. What if Canada just joined the EU outright? On paper, it sounds impossible. The Atlantic Ocean is a pretty big moat. But look at the language being used. Full spectrum of partnerships, people-to-people ties, cornerstone of stability. Let's just get speculative for just a second here. I don't usually do this, but I feel like I would really like to on this occasion. If Canada did join the EU, not just as a trading partner, but as a full member, suddenly it would be the fourth largest economy in the bloc, a leader in education and a major player on defense. It would instantly give the EU a real foothold in North America and give Canada a seat at the table that's setting global rules on tech, trade, and even climate. But more than the numbers, it would mean reimagining what Europe even means. Borders become a little bit more about values and a little bit less about geography, and honestly, it would be the ultimate hedge. If the old Atlantic order really is breaking up, why not just stitch together a new one that can weather whatever comes next? Of course, there are huge legal, cultural, and practical obstacles, but just the fact that people are talking about this tells you how much the ground is shifting, When alliances get shaky like this, even the most out there scenarios start to sound just a little bit more plausible. Let's look at the next one. Here we get a little bit more emotion. At this pivotal moment, Canada is committed to deepening its partnership with the European Union as we diversify supply chains and enhance trade ties. Together, we're strengthening a transatlantic alliance. This is not just about money. Now we're talking about a feeling of vulnerability. Melanie Joly talks about protecting critical industries and technologies. Stephanie, I'm going to go with Séjour. God, I probably butchered her name. I'm so sorry, Stephanie. From the EU side, calls this the first concrete step towards deeper cooperation at a time when the international geoeconomic landscape has really been so unstable. To think clearly here, you really have to hold two truths at once. On one hand, there is the same kind of things politicians always say. On the other hand, when you have both sides almost pleading for more partnership, it means they both feel exposed. Something is shaking the ground beneath their feet. Just a very quick personal note before we continue. My new book, Awake, the Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Self-Lies, is finally out in the world. This is not just a guide to thinking more clearly. It's really about finding a sense of clarity and calm in a world that just keeps getting louder and louder. If you ever feel like I do, a bit worn down by all of the noise and knee-jerk opinions, and you want practical ways to think things through, especially under pressure, I think you'd find this really valuable. And if you prefer to listen instead of read, I've now added a 24-minute companion podcast that walks you through some of the key ideas in depth. You'll find all of the links down below, along with a launch video that explores the bigger themes. There's also a special discount for subscribers as well, so if you're curious, just hit that subscribe button and check it out when you have a moment. And one more tiny extra thing, maybe you didn't know, but I'm a computer scientist and I have a PhD in the field. I'm working on a new course all about AI fluency, essentially making sense of the technology that's shaping the next decade. If you're interested in this space and want to help guide what I built, I'd love to have your input. There is a very quick 8-question survey, literally just a couple of minutes to fill out, and your thoughts will directly influence the content that I build next. The links are down below. It would mean so much to hear from you. Thank you for listening. Now let's just get back into the video. Now, this headline really hits. In a new Trump era, Canadians are looking for partners. And what do we see? Canadian university leaders heading to Europe, looking a little tense, maybe even anxious. The caption says applications to the EU's research programs are up because, frankly, Canada doesn't trust it can rely on the US like it used to. Let's just have a read. Canada's biggest research universities have visited Europe to try to forge joint Horizon Europe projects as the country finds itself a target of the new US president. There is no way to miss the subtext here. With US leadership unpredictable, Canada is running the classic playbook, diversify your alliances, and it's not just academic here, it is basically survival instinct, you know? And it's easy to forget, Canada's relationship with the EU is actually older than almost anyone alive actually remembers. It's back to 1959, even before Britain joined the club. This is not just about new trade deals, but about decades-long pattern of leaning on Europe when the Atlantic gets stormy. What is the framing here? Well, notice how it emphasizes shared values, a long history of close cooperation, and strong people-to-people ties. The subtext is essentially Canada and the EU have been circling each other for a very long time, but now it's less about nostalgia and more about necessity. And here's a spread of just how wide this partnership actually runs. Trade and investment, science, energy, political and security cooperation, agriculture, justice, migration, gender equality. If you're thinking critically, here's what you might notice here, that in a world that is fragmenting, Canada and the EU are quietly knitting a safety net across every major policy area. What's being smuggled in here is the idea that you don't really have to be a military superpower to shape your own destiny, but you do need friends, and lots of them. Canada will boost its investment in European Space Agency programs by 528.5 million Canadian dollars, a tenfold increase compared to previous contributions. We actually have another video on this topic as well. This is not just about satellites and science. Space is a strategic sector, a new battlefield, a new frontier for surveillance, communication, and even resource extraction. Canada's Prime Minister is basically openly saying, we're doing this to diversify the economy in the face of US tariffs. Quite clever if you're asking me. Let's ask the obvious though. Would Canada be making this kind of play if it still felt safe under the US security umbrella? Or is this what countries just do when they sense that the world order is up for grabs? But then we have Industry Minister Melanie Joly's speech at the Spacebound conference. Now, you rarely hear a cabinet minister talk like this in public. She's saying we're indeed living in a much more complex, more dangerous world, many things we cannot control, but there are things we can control and we're focusing on those. That's quite reasonable in my opinion. She goes on to frame the new defense industrial strategy as not just about tanks and planes, but about wildfires, climate change, and healthcare. The unspoken message is essentially, the world is so unpredictable right now. Defense is about resilience in every single sector. What does this mean for somebody working a normal job just trying to get by? It means the big picture is shifting under your feet, but there are still people in government trying to build guardrails, trying to keep the lights on economically, literally, and metaphorically. This one is fun, but also very telling, right? If Canada were a member of the EU, it would be fourth in GDP, second in military spending, just after France and Germany, first in college degree attainment, in the upper tier for home ownership. Stats can feel dry like this, but just think about what this means. Canada brings real heft to the table. It's not just a junior partner tagging along like it is to the USA, perhaps. In a world where alliances are being remade, these numbers are a reminder. Canada is a real pillar, not just a polite bystander, right? By the way, if you like this kind of breakdown, the meaning behind the numbers, not just the headlines, please feel free to subscribe. We're aiming for 50,000 by Christmas, and we go very deep on House of Owl. And I found this tweet super interesting. In these challenging times, it's important to know who your true friends are. Isn't that the truth, my friends? Let's end on a personal note here. Two diplomats standing and speaking across a dinner table with the caption, Canada and the EU are indeed such close friends and reliable allies. What's going unsaid, but clearly shaping this moment? This is the language of people who don't know what tomorrow will bring. Uncertainty is through the roof. But they're also making sure to say out loud who they trust to have their back. It's emotional, It's vulnerable, and in diplomacy, that's often the truest thing you'll ever hear. Let's just step back for just a second. What is really happening here? We're watching the formation of a Plan B alliance, not just for Canada, but for the EU as well. As the old anchors of the global order shift, countries that used to feel peripheral to each other are now suddenly lifelines. This reminds me of what we saw in 2018 with the US-China trade war, except now the stakes feel even higher because so many crises are hitting at once. Supply chains, security, climate, democracy itself. Who benefits from this new narrative? On the surface, it feels like both sides are benefiting, but beneath it, it's actually ordinary people who need some assurances that someone somewhere is still paying attention to the cracks forming in the old system. There is a quiet anxiety running through all of these headlines, right? And yet there is also a strange hope, in my opinion. If countries can still feel common ground, if they can still say, you're my true friend when things get tough, maybe we haven't lost the plot entirely. Here's the core insight from me today. In a world where everything feels up for grabs, it's not just the big powers that get to decide the future. Sometimes the middle and the small players, the ones who built quietly, who knit the fabric of trust and resilience, are actually the ones who hold it all together. How do you think this all plays out? Is this the start of a true Atlantic renaissance or just a temporary shelter in the storm? Let me know in the comments below. Let's have a healthy debate. I'd really love to hear your takes. If this kind of thinking resonates with you, if you want to understand how to navigate the noise, the hype, and the complexity of our current moment, I think you'd really enjoy my book. It's called Awake, the Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Soft Lies, and it's written for people who want to stay grounded, think clearly, and live in reality, even when the world makes that definitely feel a bit impossible sometimes. I've also now included a 24-minute podcast episode where we unpack some of the ideas behind Awake in a more relaxed, conversational way. Perfect if you prefer to listen while walking, driving, or just taking a break from screens. You'll find the links to everything down below. I'd love to know what you think of all of it. As always, thank you so much for being here and for thinking through these questions with me. If you like the conversation, please do consider subscribing for more, and don't forget to check out these other videos that I've linked here. It's a natural next step for a deeper dive. Sometimes when the world is most uncertain, the people who matter most are the ones you don't expect. Until next time, stay awake, stay thoughtful.